This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Tuesday, June 19th, 2018. My guest is Adam Doud of Android Authority. Hi, Adam. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We've been talking about it for a while, so I'm glad we were able to make it work. I want to talk about phones on this show because the last two shows, we really haven't had a chance to dig deep.
Sure.
I was at Computex 2 weeks ago in Taiwan, in Taipei, and although I wasn't at Apple's event since I was in Taiwan, in Taipei, wonderful Rene Ritchie of iMore was on my show last week, and we talked about the Mac, the future of the Mac.
Okay.
And WWDC and a bunch of stuff. So there's a bunch of phones that have fallen through the cracks and landed on my desks that I want to talk about, and a bunch of news. And so, yeah, I kind of want your take on it as a phone person.
Yeah, definitely talking to the right guy.
All right, I know. Okay, so let's get started with that. The first thing I want to kind of touch on is, because it's fresh, let's talk about the Oppo Find X, because it just kind of came out last night. I think were the first stories. Late at night, it was like about 2 a.m. when I saw the Verge's article, and I quickly emailed you about it.
Yeah.
Because until then, it was just, this phone's coming out. We don't know too much about it. Now we kind of know everything about it. And wow, right? I mean, it's really interesting to me that both Vivo with the Nex, a week and a half ago, and now Oppo with the Find X have come out with two basically almost bezel-less phones, right? Almost. There's a tiny chin on both of them.
Right.
But we're talking 91%, 93% screen ratios, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because they're both kind of solving the problem in similar ways, but the Oppo solution is a lot more high tech, which is which has the cool factor. The Vivo phone, has that little pop-up camera that you have to push a button, kind of like a note stylus.
Yeah, but
basically.
Honestly, I think the Vivo phone's the better approach.
It possibly is, and we can definitely dive into that.
And I'll tell you why I think that is, because first of all, I don't think aesthetically and cosmetically the way Oppo's doing it, the Oppo being the one they announced last night, where the entire top of the phone kind of slides out with the front-facing camera, earpiece on the front, and the two rear cameras and flash on the back, just to be clear.
Right.
So when you're holding the phone and the cameras are not visible, there's no cameras that you can see on the phone. Like, it's just a slab of glass in the back, slab of glass in the front. And I kind of get what they were going for, but frankly, I think that there's going to be too many compromises in the camera to make it fit in such a thin slab. The little part that pulls out, and why would you want that? The only really thing you need to have come out is the front camera, which is what Vivo is doing, and with Oppo's design, you can't put a case on the phone. Mechanically, it's going to be heavier and probably more likely to break. Think about this: if this mechanism breaks on the Oppo, you lose all ability to take pictures. The mechanism breaks on the Vivo, you only lose the ability to take selfies, right?
Fair.
Which for some people is life and death, I know. But I don't think, I just think that they did it to kind of, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's nice to have, some new innovation in phones. Like, I think form factors need variety. And this is exciting to me because we're now getting more form factor variety because of people trying to avoid the notch and do full screen phones.
Right. And
it's only a stepping stone. Like the notch, it's only a stepping stone because eventually they'll be able to put the camera right underneath the display.
Yeah. The last 2 years have kind of been, how do we work around this bezel-less thing? The notch is a workaround. These movable cameras are workarounds. None of them are real solutions, which is the part that just kind of irks me, is like none of these are very well executed. They're obvious workarounds. I mean, it's not even like they're good workarounds. They're obvious workarounds. Like this is just to get something out the door so we can move on to the next thing. Now, the one thing that I like about the Oppo is, the fact that it is a the mechanical slider, an automatic slider. It does have that cool factor that I think a lot of phone manufacturers need to have in order to raise eyebrows. You know what I mean? I mean, with the Vivo, it's a little bit more of a simplistic mechanism, but with the Oppo, it's like, hey, I need to unlock my phone. Watch this. Bzzzt, bzzzt. It's really, it has that wow factor that I think a lot of phone companies think they need. Maybe they don't, but I think a lot of phone companies think they need something that people can brag about at parties.
Oh, it's definitely bragging rights. And that's my problem with it, I think, is that it's too complex.
That's very
like
possible.
I'm an engineer, you know this, right? So to me, I'm like, okay, you're going to say, well, both cases, there's a piece that's mechanically retracting with a motor. I don't see how making the piece bigger is going to make it more complex, Miriam. Well, it's more complex because the rear cameras are included and because I think it's aesthetically ugly once it's open, this thing. Mm-hmm. This weird little... It's like semicircular cutout in the back is I think it's not a very elegant design considering what the phone looks like when it's closed, and that's in that way I think Vivo did a better job because it's much more discreet. It's like a little periscope that sticks out, right?
You're right.
In either way, honestly, I'll tell you frankly, I think that mechanically, I think they both are overkill. The Vivo thing could be a spring-loaded. Like the Vivo being the one that only has a front camera that pops out, that could be literally popping out like camera flashes, on point and shoots, right?
Right.
Where you turn when it needs the flash, it pops up this single thing and it releases with spring loaded with a solenoid, and you retract it by hand, right?
Sure.
That to me, they could have totally done that all day long, and it would have simplified the design, reduced the cost significantly. Not as cool, I admit. But the one with the Oppo, the one they launched last night, I think is such overkill. And yes, you're right, you get bragging rights, but I am not convinced I don't think it's a good design. Well, I don't think it's an attractive design. And I think that it's total overkill. It's total it's pretty much what I expect from Oppo, to be honest. Remember the rotating front camera that they had, or front and rear camera?
The selfie that spun around. Yeah. Well, and I'll throw another log onto that fire. They also used that front camera to do the 3D face unlock, similar to the iPhone 10.
So supposedly they have some sort of something equivalent to Face ID. I want to know if that can be used for, and we don't know, right? Because this phone, it might become available in the US. That's the rumor. Mm-hmm. Oppo's not confirming or denying that at this point, whether we're pretty sure the Vivo won't be. But if the Oppo is, it will need to support, Google Play services at that point. And then it will need to support Google Play. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Google Pay. Payment. And here my big question is this is all great to have face unlock is nice, especially if it's done with 3D volumetric like Face ID. I'm all for it. Mm-hmm. The big question here is, until an Android phone comes up with a way to authenticate for payment with face identification, to me, that's not the real thing. You know what I'm saying?
I hadn't even considered that. My point was, how often do we unlock our phones every day? I mean, for me, it's dozens of times, if not more. And it's probably, you're probably in the same boat, aren't you?
Well, yeah, and I think that's a really valid concern, the reliability of this thing. I mean, obviously, I'm sure they've tested, and their approach is probably, you're going to keep this phone for 2 years, probably no more than that. So they're not probably hugely concerned with long-term reliability, like a car would be, for example, I think, But yeah, you're adding a lot of moving parts. What if you drop the phone? I mean, there's so many questions here. And that's why, honestly, I feel that the Vivo design is better because it's less critical moving parts, right? I mean, the front-facing camera, you lose it, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world. And so, I think you nailed it. It's just, Oppo now has bragging rights, right? Because they made the cooler version of it. But I also think that design-wise, they didn't really push it too hard. I don't think it's that pretty of a phone.
Right, and it's not that cool. It's not that cool a car if the doors fall off.
Right, exactly. So, that's kind of my take on this. I think that overall, I'm excited about this trend. I think it's very much an interim trend. But, I'm looking forward to getting these devices. I've requested a Vivo Nex. I've requested an Oppo Find X. and I'm hoping that I get to try them out and let everybody know here on the show what I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, look, overall, I think that's the story. I want to kind of shift gears and talk about some of the other phones that
there have been so many.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bunch on my desk, as it were, in my hands. Let's talk about the Blackberry KEY2.
The sexy
that was
one.
announced
All right.
about 10 days ago. What's that?
I said the sexy one, the sexy phone that came out.
Man, that
recently.
thing is sexy. So, you know, I recently received a device to test, and I can't talk too much. There's some embargoes right now, but what I can tell you this is, you know, by the time this podcast is published, you'll see my unboxing video. The thing is the sexy. It's hot as hell, and I mean that in the, you know, the Blackberry KEY1 I think was a decent design and definitely probably the best of the Android-based BlackBerry with a hardware keyboard so far, in my opinion.
100%. Yes.
But
I 100%
the KEY2, wow, the KEY2 really cranks things up a notch. They took this design and refined it. It's thinner. It's got less plastic on it. The keyboard is matte. There's a whole bunch of little things that contribute to, in my opinion, to make this phone much more attractive. And it feels fantastic in hand. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I think make this phone at first impression really stand out. It's also unique looking. I mean, not just because of the keyboard, but the industrial design, like the rounded corners on the bottom and the kind of squared up corners on top. I'm really digging it, and I'm looking forward to putting that phone through its paces and letting you guys know in a week or two what my thoughts are.
Yeah.
I'm
interested in that too. Yeah, I love the KEY1.
On what you've seen, photos and whatever videos of the KEY2.
I mean, my thoughts on the design of the phone are, you know, it looks great, just like the KEY1 did. I had the black edition of the KEY1.
Oh, that's a hot one.
It is. That was the hot one. My concern with the KEY1, there's two reasons I don't use the KEY1 today as a daily driver. One, my version is locked to AT&T, and I switched to T-Mobile. So that's kind of a big one. But the second one was just the performance on the KEY1, and I was told by a couple of different reviewers. I said, "Yay, I started using the KEY1." They're like, "Yeah, give it a couple of weeks." and sure enough, I mean, it was just like the thing just started to get dog slow, and it was largely because of the software. And I hope that BlackBerry has addressed that, because if there was a universal pan on the KEY1, it was the software and the lag that was on it. But everything else about the phone was wonderful. You know, the fingerprint sensor placement on the space bar was brilliant. The keyboard is awesome. I love the fact that they added the what do they call it? The key that you can press in order to do a keyboard shortcut when you're not on the home screen. I forget the name of that.
I don't know either.
And if I remember correctly, they also added multiple different apps that you can launch with the convenience key. Is that right? Like the convenience key on the KEY1, it was one app that you could launch, but now it looked like they gave you like a little side menu, which is awesome. I'm excited to get my hands on it. I don't know when that's going to be, but I would definitely love to put that thing through its paces myself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it really looks hot. At least so far for me, my brief time with it. I'm impressed with the design, and spec-wise, it's just a pretty much an update. There is a bunch of small things like you're talking about, the hardware that's slicker in terms of the keyboard and shortcuts and stuff. Another nice thing is they put the power lock key on the right side now, along with the convenience key and the volume rocker, which I always felt the power key on the left was a bit weird.
It was. I remember tweeting once and saying that if you're going, pro tip for using the BlackBerry KEY1, make sure you assign the convenience key to an app that you don't mind launching every time you try to turn off the phone.
Exactly. And that's no longer as much of an issue because the power lock key is in the middle between the volume rocker and the convenience key now. And it's ridged, like you can feel it. You know it's the power lock key.
That's awesome.
By touch. So, yeah. So that's pretty big news. Spec-wise, this is now upgraded from Snapdragon 625 to a 660 and from 4 gigs of RAM to 6 gigs of RAM. And, still has micro SD, and I think my review has 64 gigs of storage. It does have a dual camera in the back now, instead of a 12 megapixel f over 2.0 on the old one. It's f over 1.8 now, the main camera. And it has a telelens, f over 2.6, 2 times zoom, as a secondary camera in the back. So dual camera in the back. And then the front camera appears to be the same. The display appears to be the same, 4.5 inch 1080p, 3 to 4 aspect ratio, I believe. Or it's 3 to 2, can't remember. Same display, same exact display. And then battery's 3,500 milliamp hours, hasn't changed. So, it's, a modernized, and it still has headphone jack, woohoo, right? So it's a modernized version of the KEY2 from last year. And hopefully, as you said, the biggest issue was performance over time. And I hope that that's been addressed. And, it's going to be interesting because obviously this is something you need to test over some time, right? You can't just. Oh, yeah. So I'm hoping that it's basically becomes obvious quickly if it happens, or not something I discovered, after telling you how much I love it on the podcast in 2 weeks or whatever. And then a month later go, wah, wah, wah.
Mea culpa, yeah. And actually, speaking of battery performance, the battery life, if it's even like 75% of what the KEY2 was, it's still awesome and still going to kill everybody else out there. So.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, if they're not the same, I think slightly better, because I think the 660 is a newer chip. It's more power efficient, and this is exactly the same size battery. So so we'll see.
That would be incredible.
So I just wanted to mention the Blackberry KEY2 simply because, well, it's there. I didn't talk about it in the podcast before because of all my travel, and because we kind of got on tangents in the topics a few times over the last couple of weeks. But at the same time, this phone got released. Folks got hands-on. I have a review unit, so stay tuned. The next one I want to talk about a little bit is the Moto Z3 Play. Again, something that was announced a little bit before I went to Computex, or while I was at Computex in Taipei, Taiwan. And this is a successor to, I think, my favorite of the Z series Moto phones, which is the cheaper one, right? The Play. Mm-hmm. So just to give you some background, when the Z1 Play came out, and it was, to me, the better phone for a number of reasons. It was cheaper. It still had the great same quality, design, build quality as the more expensive Zs. It performed really well. It had incredible battery life, one of the best at the time. It had a headphone jack, which the bigger ones were lacking. And of course, you could still do all the Moto Mod stuff. So, while the Z and Z Force original were kind of like launched first and really stole the show because the Z was so thin and the mods and all that, I think the Z Play was really the star of the show. And so last year when they did the Z2 line, the Z2 Play actually came out first. And honestly, it took everything we loved about the Z1 in many ways and made it better. It did lose a little bit on battery life because it was a little thinner and the battery was a little smaller, but the processor was upgraded and it was better performance. So it actually balanced itself out more or less, and it still had the headphone jack and the camera was better. And so I loved the Z2 Play last year. And so this year, we don't know what the Z3 is going to look like. The Z3 non-Play, but the Z3 Play seems to be, again, an upgrade of the Z2 Play, and it adds, of course, an 1899 display on the front. So it means the fingerprint is now, sensor is now relocated to the side of the phone, has a dual camera system in the back, which the Z2 Force had last year, and it has lost the headphone jack. So to me, it was already sounding a little frumpy because losing the headphone jack on the Play version is a little weird to me.
Yeah, kind of a step
I understand,
backwards.
The Z3 Force or Z3 or whatever it's going to be called, the big flagship. Last year they only did the Force, not the regular one. I expect that to have no headphone jack and to push the envelope. But I think the Z3 Play, that's one of the things that made it so awesome, was that it was still, an upper mid-ranger. And the pricing on the Z3 Play, it's expensive. At that price, why wouldn't you buy OnePlus 6? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well,
I can't remember the price.
A lot of people ask that question about that price point.
Do you know what it is off the top of your head?
Oh, the price for the Z3 Play or for the OnePlus?
The Z3 Play. I think it's almost as expensive as a OnePlus 6.
I don't know if it...
And so, I'm going to quickly Google it. I think that's the problem. It's too expensive. And for what it is, because you're not getting a Snapdragon 845 at that price. It's $499. No, that's the Z2 Play. Never mind. Let's see. Is there pricing? Z3 Play $499.
$499 unlocked.
$30 more buys you OnePlus 6. Yeah,
then that's a compelling argument, and I think here's the thing about Motorola, and man. Motorola, I love Moto's concept of the modular phone, the Moto mods, and we're gonna be talking about Moto mods. That's gonna be a large part of this conversation because of my concern. Miriam and I discussed this a little bit off the air. And we both had different concerns about the Z3, the Z3 Play. But the thing about Motorola is if you're buying into Motorola, you're also buying into their ecosystem with the Moto mods. So, you ask the question, for $30 more, why not get a OnePlus 6? Well, maybe you have a drawer filled with projectors and battery packs and speakers that won't work with a OnePlus 6. So, I mean, it's very possible. And, this is the third generation of the Moto Z family. And during the first generation of the announcement of the first generation of the Moto Z family, Motorola said, we're going to support this for 3 years. Here we are on year 3. And the question is, what does the future look like for Moto mods? I don't know, because I don't think Motorola has really said anything about that.
Well, they said, I think you nailed it. They said we'll support this for 3 years. So is this the last year?
That would seem to be the case.
I mean, that's the question I would ask if I bought one of these. I mean, for me, it's hard to judge because I like the idea of the mods. I think some of the mods are cool, but I don't see myself ever spending the money on a phone like that if I were to use my own money to buy these. Right. As a reviewer, they're interesting. I like the idea, and I could recommend the Z2 and Z1 Play based on the fact that they were well-rounded for their money, but the landscape is shifting, You can buy a lot of phone for that right now. And yes, you have to forego the Moto mods, but, is that a big sacrifice? Who do you really care unless, as you said, you have a drawer full of mods right now?
Unless you have the drawer full of mods. And actually, the funny thing is that Motorola is finally doing with the Z3 Play what it should have been doing with the Z1 Play is that it's actually bundling a Moto mod with the phone. It's bundling in the Moto mod battery pack. Now, if you wanted to lock people into your ecosystem, you do this back in 2000. What year is it now? 2016. So that when 2017 rolls around and you've got this battery mod, I should probably get a phone that supports this. Then you've got locked people into your ecosystem. Now it seems like you're trying to empty the warehouse so that you can move something else in, or at least that's just the impression that I get because I've been paying attention for the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, the big other thing with the Z series is that last year's Z2 Force I thought was a very disappointing flagship. It did not, hit the mark and compete favorably with the other 835 based flagships. The dual camera wasn't very good, honestly. It just didn't have the quality you'd expect from a dual camera system in a flagship. And so I'm wondering, is the Z3 Force, not Z3 Force, the Z3 Play going to have a camera that performs well enough? Because it's nice to add a dual camera to a phone, but honestly, I'd rather have a single camera that's well sorted than a dual camera that's not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, cough, Razr, cough, Essential, cough, Moto Z2 Force.
Cough, Pixel. Oh, you're talking about dual camera. Sorry.
No, I said I'd rather have a single camera that performs well than a dual camera that performs poorly. And the three worst offenders last year was the Razr, the Essential, and the Z2 Force. Of course, the Pixel has a single camera and it
is great.
Performs like a champ. So the Pixel 2 at least, and 2 XL. So I think, that's why I'm kind of weary of the Z3 play, because no headphone jack's a big thing in that price point. I think it should have it, and also it's too expensive for what the specs are, and the dual camera better be half decent. And based on my experience so far with Moto, the dual cameras haven't been that great. The Moto G6 I recently reviewed, which is our segue for the next topic, it has dual camera and it's kind of meh. And the X4 last year had dual camera and was kind of meh. And, they weren't terrible.
Am I crazy? But haven't Motorola cameras always been a little bit meh? I mean, like all the way back to the Moto X.
Absolutely. They've always been a little underwhelming, but not terrible. You know what I'm saying? Like some of them have hit the mark. Like in my opinion, for example, the Z2 Force last year was okay. Sorry, Z2 Play, not Force, because the Force is the one I thought wasn't that good. Honestly, I felt that the Z2 Play single camera system was better than the Z2 Force dual camera play system. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah, so 2 steps forward,
it's kind of interesting.
Back.
And then, last year's G5 I thought was okay for the price point.
Oh, yeah.
I had f/1.7, 12 megapixel, large pixels, 1.4, 1.55 micron. And, the software wasn't quite up to par to what you'd expect, but the hardware certainly helped the phone along in terms of imaging performance. You could tell that with better software, it could be pretty damn competitive for its price point on the G5 last year, the Moto G5. Right. So, so we'll see how that Z3 play, pardon the pun, plays out.
Right.
Mwah, mwah, mwah.
That's okay. We'll forgive you. It's your show.
But yeah, thank you. But I think that the Moto G6 is what I want to segue to, because the Moto G6, I reviewed for GeekSpin, which is a new site recently launched by Elena Stone, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Chip Chick. Elena is awesome, and she said, "Hey, Miriam, you want to review phones for me?" I was like, "Sure, anytime." I really enjoyed reviewing phones for Elena at Chip Chick. So I said, here are the phones that are on my table right now. They're just freshly minted. She's like, "Oh, G6, I think would be what I want." So I wrote this review. You can check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes. And my takeaway is industrial design, build quality materials. This thing is so premium for $250. Nothing can touch it. Nothing. It's as premium as a OnePlus 6 at $530. It's as premium as an iPhone 10 or LG G7 or a Samsung Galaxy S9. It's insane for the money. And it's not plastic, it's not fake, everything is top-notch quality. It's basically like the Moto X4 last year that a lot of us praised for its build quality at its price point. Now they've brought that down to an even more affordable $250. And it's going to sell for $200 anytime soon now. Prices, these kind of phones go down in price pretty rapidly. And overall, it's just the same story as the Moto G has always been. It's a well-rounded, all-round, decent phone in every way that, punches way above its weight, in my opinion. The only thing that, and now it has USB Type-C for the first time in the G series. The only thing that I still do not understand, I cannot wrap my head around, that Moto's been doing forever on the G series, and I could understand it 4 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, but last year with the G5 and this year with the G6 is no NFC, which means no Google Pay, no online payment. What were they thinking, Adam?
I'm getting angry the more you talk about this.
Please give us a rant.
So I'm a mobile payment guy. I'm a mobile payment geek. I mean, I've written entire editorials about mobile payments and using mobile payments. And, I've gone days at a time without ever touching a credit card or a wallet.
I'm the same way. I love it. It's annoying, right? When you have to pull out your wallet.
Right. And everybody has mobile payments now. Now, I don't know if you want to call this a good thing or a bad thing, but like big stores like Target and Walmart, they're actually developing their own mobile payment system, which doesn't require NFC, which is kind of a good thing. But at the same time, you just go to the terminal, you whip out your phone, bam, you're done, you're walking away. And especially with these days with the proliferation of chip readers, and those things are so freaking slow. You could just tap your phone on the card reader and you're done. Just not having NFC is it's practically unforgivable. And I can't wrap my head around even why. Look, you want to sell a phone for $100, $150, fine. But $250, you're starting to get into some expectations, and not having NFC, which is probably not a big deal for most of the people, but for the people listening to this podcast, damn it, give us our NFC. We want to pay with Google Pay. So not having that it's a total deal breaker for me. I would never be able to use that phone just because of that. But I guess if there's a corner to cut, it's probably better than GPS or something.
I don't think it's acceptable. It's 20-cent corner to cut.
Fair. I mean, I'm not arguing with you.
So I think I dock them on that, and I hope next year's is resolved. I think they got to stop thinking that way. I honestly think this is a Lenovo move, not a Moto move, because the parent company is a Chinese-based company, as you know, and they do not value NFC. A lot of flagships in China don't even have it.
That's fair.
So
that is fair.
So, I mean, you kind of have to go to a much higher tier to get NFC in Asia, whereas unless you're in Japan, where it's pretty much par for the course because they do train. You can go to the subway with and buy NFC stuff at like vending machines and stuff with NFC. But in China, primarily it's WeChat Pay. WeChat Pay is barcode based, QR code. So they don't really care about NFC. And so they tend to only put it on the higher end phones, just basically as a way to, tap two phones to transfer a photo or pair a Bluetooth device or whatever. They don't even think of mobile payment. And I think that translates into Lenovo's roadmap in some kind of weird product way where they're like the people in charge of the US product are like, no, we need it. And then the people in charge in China of the manufacturing are like, no, we'll save a buck. Right. And they don't really listen to their, the American folks very much because they're a Chinese company and that's kind of how they do things. And I don't want you guys to think that I'm making general blanket statements. This is just an observation from years and years of consulting with clients in China. They tend to have, they take the advice of Westerners and then throw it right out the window, which is really weird. Like,
tell us how you really feel.
A prime example of that is what happened to Leico, right? It was like, we're going to launch in the US, we're going to do a big stink and it's going to be a big deal. And I mean, Leico has all kinds of other issues because, there's a lot of shady dealings with the financing of the company and whatever. But in its essence, they hired and made a big team happen in Silicon Valley here. We're all ready to do things. And then they completely botched it because they just didn't listen to the people they hired. They were experts in their market. Yeah. And they threw it all out, and that's tends to be a thing they do. And I'm worried that this is what we're seeing since the Lenovo acquisition of Moto, with Moto phones in the mid-range not having NFC is a direct result of that mentality.
Yeah. That being said, though, I mean, the Moto G6 is a wonderful return of Motorola back to prominence in the mid-range space.
Well, I think they've always been prominent in the mid-range space. Honestly, if you ask me for a mid-range phone, the $200 mark in the last few years, I'd always say Moto G first.
Yeah, but Honor would be really close in the conversation.
Yeah, but Honor is only this year. Prior to that, they didn't have anything. The Honor 7X is the first phone from Honor in that price point that really blows everything away.
Right, and that's my point is, Honor was really making a play for that title of being the king of the mid-range space, and I think the Moto G6 pulls that back and says, not so fast there, buddy.
Exactly, but that's because they've always been the leader themselves. So it's really like they're reclaiming their proper seat in line, in my opinion. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the 7X is a great phone, and I would really have to think hard if I had only $200, $250 to spend and had to buy a phone today. To choose between the Moto G6 and the Honor 7X. The Honor 7X is going to give you worse software, more annoying software. And there are some things about it that are worse, like it doesn't have USB Type-C, it's micro USB, and it doesn't have NFC either. So
it does not.
But it's, and it's also metal build, not a glass build. For some people, that's good. For some people, that's bad. I think that the current zeitgeist of phones is glass sandwich, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's where you want to be if you want something premium. Certainly. You can get something that looks super premium with the Moto G6 and not so premium with the 7X. It's very boring looking, even though it's not an offensive design in any way. So, both of them have displays that are okay, but not great. Cameras that are okay but not great. Again, the G series has always been okay but not great, but better than average for the price. And you never left anything on the table except for NFC with the G series. And I think this continues G6. I really enjoyed that phone. The headphone jack's nice. Of course, it has one. And, the cameras are okay. I think the 7X has the edge on the imaging. You can tell a lot of the AI from, the P10 from last year and from the from the Huawei Mate 10 Pro from this past winter have kind of seeped into the mid-range at Huawei and Honor with the 7X and the Huawei 9, Honor 9 Lite is the one to get at that price point. It's not sold in the US, but if you're in Europe or Asia, the Honor 9 Lite adds NFC, is a glass sandwich, is slightly smaller in size, also has an 18:9 display, and is, in my opinion, better than the 7X, and it's the same price. So that's the one to go for if you're going to buy a $200 phone abroad. If I had to pick between the Honor 9 Lite and the Moto G6, it'd be a much harder choice, to be honest with you.
Definitely. 100% agree.
So the G6, check out my review. I enjoyed it. I want to talk a little bit more about the HTC U12 Plus, because last time I talked about it on the podcast, which I think is two or three episodes ago, I had not received a review unit yet. So I was based purely on my time reading other people's stories. And since then, I've been able to use it pretty much every day. I've had it. I made it my primary phone with a Taiwanese SIM card in Taipei when I was at Computex 2 weeks ago. And so I took all my photos pretty much for Computex. If you saw my tweets, they were all taken with U12 Plus. The camera is really impressive. Just as good as would you'd expect from the current state of the art. Like I'd say it's up there with the OnePlus 6, which as we know this year really has done a great job in imaging. It's up there, maybe a little below the Galaxy S9 and LG G7. It's definitely not Pixel 2 material or P20 Pro, but that's a tough one to ask.
Yeah, that's a big
but it's very competitive camera-wise. The only thing that is a total disappointment for me in the camera space is the front camera is really not that great. Even though it's a dual front camera, I really don't feel that it's not really nothing to write home about. And of course, I can do bokeh because it's got dual camera, big deal, right? It's not that great. But the rear camera has one issue, and that's the telelens doesn't have OIS. And if you know anything about that, if you have an iPhone 8 Plus, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, the 8 Plus does not have OIS on the telelens, whereas the iPhone 10 has OIS on the telelens, and this new Samsung phones that have dual camera have OIS on the telelens, like the Note 8 and Galaxy S9 Plus, and it makes all the difference because the telelens is the one you need motion compensation for the most. It's a zoom, right? You're likely to shake a lot more, and it gets amplified. And honestly, here's what my takeaway was of using the U12 Plus. I was better off using the main camera set to 1x in the viewfinder and cropping it after the fact to two times crop, like to zoom time 2 times, than to use the telelens in low light.
Okay, that sounds fair.
That's my experience, because without OIS in low light, it would just fall apart. And also, the f-stop is not that good for the telelens as usual, right? So that's kind of where it falls apart, I think. The other thing, lack of headphone jack is still a real bummer, especially on an HTC phone, considering how good the headphone jacks and headphone amps and DACs used to be. I just feel that I was hoping that maybe they'd revert on that, just because all the negative feedback they got for dropping the headphone jack last year as a small company, they would smarten up about it. Like, I don't see Google or Apple reverting, but I could see them do it. And then the two biggest vexing things that I think a lot of reviewers agree with is the battery life is not as good as it could be. Probably because it has to drive this gigantic Quad HD 18:9 IPS panel. It's a beautiful screen, though, to be honest. Not as good as the LG G7 IPS. That thing is just the best IPS panel I've ever seen. Well, maybe not. Well, close, because I think the iPhone 8 has one of the best LCDs IPSs out there. And then those those pressure sensitive power lock key and volume rocker buttons
those
that
buttons
are not physical buttons. I mean, what's your take on that? You've read about it. Have you tried it?
I haven't tried it myself. I like the idea of it, and I think the engineering part of you should probably appreciate, the fewer moving parts you can have, the better. But I like the idea of them, having just, an area that you can touch in order to, turn the phone on or off or adjust the volume. It's an interesting concept, but HTC seems to have gone about it in a bad way, or at least initially there's talk that there might be a software update coming that can fix it. But at the same time, get the software update before you put it in reviewers' hands. It's the question, and I think a lot of companies face this is, when are we ready to go? And again, you and I were talking off the air, there's a lot that goes into, from a company standpoint, there's probably a lot of moving parts that maybe didn't line up quite right to get those buttons exactly right before they shipped. So, it sucks, but at the same time, that's one of those things where it kind of has to work. It can't not work. If you want to have a phone, you need to be able to turn the volume up and you need to be able to turn the volume down, and you need to be able to turn it on and off. And if that doesn't work, then you kind of have a broken phone. Yeah.
I mean, look, the reality is it works. It's just that there's sometimes a delay between you pushing and getting the haptic feedback. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. That's the disconnect. And then also the pressure, the variation in pressure, like it's not consistent pressure wise. So like sometimes you press it, barely you touch it, you pick up the phone and bang, you put yourself in do not disturb mode.
Right.
And you're like, oh, you know how frustrating that is? Every other time you pick up the phone, you're in do not disturb mode.
Right.
Like that's been my experience, because you touch the volume down rocker, you don't realize it. The haptic feedback happens a little later than you expect. So you don't know it happened. You think you maybe got a notification or something and you're done. Yeah. Now you look at your phone 2 hours later, you have all these notifications. You had no idea what happened.
Right. And everyone's like, why aren't you calling me back? Why don't you, don't you love me anymore?
So look, the haptic engine on the U12 Plus, I think, is really high quality. It feels a lot like the one on the G7, LG G7 and LG V30, V35, which I don't know if you know, but they both use linear motors. Also very similar to what we have on the Pixel 2 XL. Again, all these phones were made by LG, other than, of course, the HTC U12 Plus. So LG clearly has a very high quality linear motor for vibration, which is all very close to the haptic engine on the iPhones, which, as we know, are all the best. That and the MacBook clicky thing on the MacBooks, which is also uncannily good. Right. So we know it can be done right. Apple has done it right. LG's done a pretty good job with it. So they have this, I can tell they have a good quality piece of hardware in there for vibration, for haptic feedback on the U12 Plus. But I think it's a kind of delay and pressure sensitivity that needs to be tweaked in software until they get it right, so that it feels like a real button. And it doesn't right now. It just feels like you're kind of mushing on something and then something happens afterwards.
And the good news is that this is a software issue, so it can be fixed, and it will be fixed almost certainly. It's not like this is, shipped out with a defective component and now you're kind of screwed. So, I mean, the let's take the silver lining here is that, this can be fixed, and so it won't be a problem for forever, but it is kind of a problem now, and now is when people are talking about it. So there's definitely a disconnect there, and so that, but I don't know. At the same time, it is HTC, so I mean, it's not like they were really going to be competing with the Galaxies of the world anyway, so maybe they can afford a little delay.
You buy this phone because you're a fan and you want a flagship. It is a good flagship, folks. It's good, okay? Snapdragon 845, it's fast, it's solid, and it looks beautiful, it's well designed. It's a little boring maybe, except for that pseudo-transparent back. I have the blue one, which is pseudo-transparent. I mean, the industrial design is it looks a little dated because it doesn't have a notch and stuff. It's kind of weird to say that today, right? But it's true. And it's only an 18:9 display, so it does have that top and bottom bezel. But honestly, it's beautifully made. It's a totally respectable flagship. The only things that can be fixed in hardware are the lack of OIS on the telelens and the headphone jack. But if you can live without that, I think things like even battery life are going to get improved, because it's just a matter of fine-tuning the software a little further. We're not talking about disaster battery life here. I'm just saying that, generally speaking, for the specs, based on my experience with similar devices, based on the battery size that is in the U12 Plus, which I think is 3,500 milliamp hour, I was expecting more in terms of durability of the battery pack.
Sure.
In terms of, delivering power for a longer time. So it's not like, a deal breaker. It's just an observation. It can be tuned. It can be fixed. So overall, kudos to HTC, for still existing and making phones despite having sold half of their engineering team to Google, right, and making phones that are actually pretty compelling. And if you're an HTC fan, this is definitely the phone to get right now. I mean, yeah, and there's a lot of HTC fans. So
HTC has a lot of great ideas, and so it's hard to not be. It's hard to not love HTC as a company because they have really great ideas. The Ultra Pixel, this is another example of that type of innovation. And just HTC, and they focused HTC focused on sound for several generations of phones as well. For the audio files. So it's just HTC has really great ideas. The execution and certainly the marketing definitely could use a little bit of an upgrade.
On the plus side, they have Jeff Gordon as their PR person, not to be confused with Jeff Gordon, the race car driver, but Jeff is awesome, and he, I think, is single-handedly responsible for a lot of the love we have for HTC.
I'm glad you said that because I actually was confusing him for the race car driver.
Yeah, don't. No, it's very easy to confuse him. Anyway, so that's kind of like the lowdown on the phone situation in the last 2-3 weeks. Things that I didn't talk about. Things I didn't talk about on the podcast that I missed, that you might have wondered, why hasn't Miriam talked about the KEY2 or the Z3 Play or the Moto G6 or the U12 Plus? I have talked about the U12 Plus. I've briefly mentioned the G6, but I definitely have not mentioned anything about the KEY2 or the Z3 Play. So there you've got it. You've got my take initially, at least, on some of these things. You remember on the KEY2, check out my unboxing video. It'll be linked in the show notes below. And, I always have links in the show notes for everything, but check out my Moto G6 review in particular on GeekSpin. So there's a few news items I want to talk about really quickly, Adam. Yeah. I used to work at Pebble in the early days when Pebble was on top of the world. I kind of feel that's partially responsible. I'm don't want to be humble bragging here, but I do feel that a big part of it was my job as their head of communications, keeping them relevant and keeping the media connected to the Pebble brand with review units and all that good stuff. I worked there. I'm a big fan of smartwatches. I was lucky to be able to get into that company in the early days. That's how I ended up leaving Engadget, because you don't say no to an opportunity like this. Sure. And I learned a lot. And, I left before things got really ugly over there. It's kind of a sad story. And boy, did they. Yes, it's a sad story. But here's the reality. Pebble users love their Pebbles for a number of reasons, right? Primarily, they're really small and they have really great battery life. They certainly don't love them for the display, because the displays always kind of sucked, in my opinion. But because of that, there's an entire universe of folks out there still using their Pebbles. I personally use Android Wear mostly right now. I've got a Huawei Watch 2. Not my favorite, but it does the job. It has great battery life, which is really important to me, and it has an FC for payment. That's all that matters. But going back to Pebble, I use a Pebble when I'm at Burning Man in the summer. As you know, I work there, so I'm there for 2-3 weeks at a time in the desert, and I need, I work, so I need to know what time it is, and I don't need my notifications per se. But it's nice when I'm in range of signal to actually get a few of them pop up. So I use my Pebble because it has a 1 week battery life, basically. Yeah. So I have to charge it maybe 2 or 3 times while I'm there for the whole event, for the whole 3 weeks with setup and tear down and all that. And it's really nice. It's also really bulletproof. Like, it's dust and water resistant, and it's,
there's a lot to love.
It's really good. The display is really good in daylight, and I spend a lot of time outside when I'm there because it's in the bright sunlight all the time. So the Pebble really lives up to its goodness when I use it there. So I still use it somewhat, and of course we all know Fitbit acquired Pebble, and what was left of Pebble, I should say, and they decided to kind of go a different direction. Yeah, well, exactly. And they decided to sunset the Pebble software stuff, like all the cloud-based stuff, like things like App Store and firmware distribution, all that. It's no longer going to work very soon. Right. So there's this group called Rebble, which is kind of funny, right? Rebels, Pebble, Love Rebel.
It. Haha. Love it.
It's spelled like Pebble with an R, Rebel. And this group is going to be taking over basically the App Store / firmware support and such cloud backend for Pebble for future, for the future. I think it's community driven. I'm sure that if you can donate a bit of your time and or money to keep that effort going as a community effort, it'll benefit you if you're a Pebble user, at least for a few years. Sure. I can see this, turning into a thing like Linux or like, as you said yourself, and, when we were talking before the podcast started, the WebOS community, keeping WebOS going for years on devices that were no longer supported. Yep. I think this is good. It is good for Pebble users. And so if you're a Pebble user and you're listening and you weren't aware of this, go check out Rebble, type Rebel with Pebble with an R, basically, and Google that. I'll have something in the show notes as well. Sign up to their system so that you can you can kind of like jump in.
You have to link your account for Pebble over to their account over there so that you can still get like app updates and things like
Correct.
that.
So you do that now, and then I think it's going live on July 1st. So this to me was significant enough to, kind of discuss, because I feel that, I have a bit of a fond spot myself, and I think there are a lot of people out there who are jonesing on, damn Pebble, I wish, or they might have moved on already, but they might have a Pebble in a drawer somewhere that still works. So there you go.
Right. Yeah. My old podcast partner, Ryan, he's a Pebble fanatic, and I think he would be very happy to hear about this. So I'll definitely pass that along to him when I get a chance. But yeah, it's really great when a community can get together and prevent the demise of an otherwise beloved operating. You don't see that all the time. You don't see a lot of I don't know, Debian groups that are, keeping their phones alive. So just, shout out to the WebOS folks that are out there that I actually just met up with them a few weeks ago.
Cool.
Yeah. And, duct tape and baling wire, and they are keeping this stuff together. There's actually I hate to digress a little bit, but there's actually an app that you can download for WebOS devices that's called the WebOS Museum, which is basically copies of every app that used to be in the Palm App Store, and you can still install apps from this WebOS Museum app, which I just think it's pretty cool, and I think
is really cool.
And I can see something similar happening for Pebble here.
Absolutely. I have a Palm Pre 3.
Do you?
Yeah, I have one of the few.
I have one of each.
It's an AT&T locked one, sadly, but I have it. It's in mint condition, and maybe I'll charge it up and download some of those apps and get it back to life, because I loved WebOS, and
you have to work quite a bit to do it, though. Just fair warning.
What's that?
It's not a straightforward procedure. You need to do a lot of side loading to get that to work.
Yeah, that's what the fun is, right?
That's right.
I mean, I never thought their hardware was the best, but the Pre 3 certainly was the best they ever did, and I thought the OS was phenomenal, and I was a big fan of the Pre back in the day. I still have a Pre wireless charger sitting somewhere in my room. I never put it away. It's just sitting there doing nothing.
I have one stuck to my refrigerator.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, because they were the first to do wireless charging. Of course, not compatible with anything we use today, but
right.
Yeah. So switching gears, I'm kind of excited about this one. Maybe you can explain this to the listeners. Google Messages for the web.
Yeah. This is actually a pretty cool thing. One of the biggest hangups that Google Messages and just texting on Android has always had is the fact that it always had to be on a device. There was but now Android is working on bringing its messaging platform to a browser. It's not available for everybody. They're starting to roll it out, I believe, this week. And so, but what you're going to do is you're going to download this Android Messages app, which is the default texting app for a lot of different phones. But if it's not on yours, like I'm using a Galaxy S9 now, so I had to download the Messages app. And fun fact, it actually transferred all my messages from Samsung Message over into Android Messages.
Well, it actually doesn't transfer anything, Adam. The messaging database is what that app accesses, and also the Facebook Messenger app if you let it use your text messaging.
Gotcha.
So the way it is there's a database in Android for text messaging and MMSs, and that database, any app that you give permission to can access that database. So, of course, most of the phone manufacturers have their own messaging app or text messaging app, which accesses that database, which is the Galaxy S9 you've been using. And then Messages is Google's in-house own, basically, skin interface on top of that database.
Never mind the man behind the curtain, Miriam.
No, it's okay. I'm just letting you know, because a lot of people don't understand that there's actually no transfer going on here. This is actually just the same apps. It's just basically a skin on top of the database that's sitting in the background.
Right. Well, that I did not know that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I kind of lost my train of thought.
You install
Android Messages, and then there will be an option within the settings, which I currently don't have. I actually just checked as we were talking about this, but there will be an option to link to a browser, and then on your browser you go to messages.android.com. They show you a QR code. You scan the QR code, and blammo, there's your messages. In theory, it's working for neither Miriam nor myself. But in theory, you should see your messages all in the web browser, so that you can, if you get a message from your
computer and send texts and receive texts. And there's still text. This is not like iMessages. There's still text messages. It's still interfaces with your phone over the cloud, basically. And a lot of people are a little butthurt right now because it's not using their Google login for this. It's actually using this barcode pairing. And the reason for that is because unlike other things in Google's universe, you do not need a login to use the Messages app. So there's no guarantee that the people using the Messages app on their phone have a Google account to start with. So the reason it's linked via barcode is because that way you don't even need a Google account. It's done completely, it creates basically a temporary account. And in fact, after 2 or 3 weeks, if you don't use that web session, it deletes all of the history from that web session. So you never leave any traces of your text messaging on the web. It's basically all stored on your phone, and you're remoting to your phone via the web over the internet, which is cool because you don't have to necessarily be connected on the same network for it to work. And that's my understanding.
Yeah, it's really cool because, you're sitting at your computer and you get a text message and you're like trying to go back and forth and you're just like, I want to stop picking up my phone. Now you can just switch over to a new browser tab and blammo, fire off a quick message, and it's going to be pretty great. I'm very much looking forward to getting this working. So. Yeah,
and I think the interesting thing to me about it is, unlike iMessage, it is not relying on some kind of weird, substituting data communication for text messaging. This is taking advantage of some of the new technologies that are being developed for text messaging that make it more universal and make it data driven instead of, traditionally text messaging is part of the GSM standard, using some status data that is included in the standard communication protocol. It's not actually using the data as in the internet data part. That's why text messaging is always a separate plan usually. Mostly it's thrown in for free these days. But you have to understand how text messaging works. And iMessages, of course, does all kinds of trickery at the server level to basically have it work as an internet protocol instead of text messaging. So this is a little different. It's also using the new protocol that is being developed for text messaging. What's it called again, Adam? You remember RCS? No.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that.
Let's Google it.
It's like a RCS. It's like RCS, Rich Communication Services.
Correct. It's using RCS. So I was right. I've got the right acronym. So RCS is, the one thing where iMessage still wins, in my opinion, is that it's encrypted end to end, and it's only basically living in Apple's universe when you're using it. But the problem with that, of course, is that it's really incompatible with text messaging. And if it breaks down, if you know that if you take your SIM card out of an iPhone and you don't turn off iMessages before you do, and you put it in an Android phone, you won't be getting text messages on Android. It breaks down. It's very, very, like the way Apple implemented iMessage, finicky. I think is really bad. And it breaks a lot of standards. And yes, in the end, it does what it's supposed to do, which is lets you use your iPad and your Mac to send and receive text messages. But also it, is very finicky, and all the advantages is it's fully encrypted, of course. So RCS isn't fully encrypted. This thing with the Messages app, I don't know if it's fully encrypted.
It is not, I believe.
But at the same time, it's using a standard, a protocol. And once Apple adopts RCS as a protocol, and they're going to have to, because in some places it's going to be necessary when you want to talk to an Android user that has an RCS-based text messaging system from an iPhone, you're going to need that.
Right.
So at some point, they're going to support it too. And then, the whole world will be able to do basically iMessages, except that on Android phones, it won't be end-to-end encrypted. So you lose some, but you gain some. In my opinion, it's a better implementation, even though security-wise, it's worse. So, it's kind of hit and miss. Like, you can't win. You can't win.
It's also possible that there might be advancements in the future that allow that to be end-to-end encrypted. So we'll see. We'll just have to
look,
see
the reality is this. I've always said to people, if you want encrypted, if you want to use, messaging with your friends, don't use text messages or iMessages even. Use WhatsApp or use Signal. There are ways to get fully end-to-end encrypted messaging that are in my opinion, much more reliable and much better implemented. I think WhatsApp is one of the best implementation, in my opinion, for messaging. I do phone calls with my mom on WhatsApp all the time because it's over data. It's free.
Right.
She's in France. She uses it on her phone. To her, it's just a phone call. In the sense of she has data plans, so it comes in as data. It's like Skype calling, but it's awesome, but it's much more bulletproof and so there are alternatives. But it's true, and it's nice to have a single point of contact where you do all your messaging in one place, right?
Yeah, that will be nice. If we can get rid of the blue bubbles and the green bubbles.
And honestly, for me, that text messaging right now is the biggest problem. Is that yes, I use it a lot, and especially when I talk to my iPhone friends and I don't have iMessage since I'm on Android. And so I can't do it from my laptop or from my desktop or from my Chromebook. This solves the problem, right?
Right,
so
absolutely.
I'm looking forward to them flipping the switch for this to work, because right now all the pieces are in place, but they haven't flipped the switch on yet. So see what happens, right?
Yeah. I'm excited.
So the final thing on my notes here that I wanted to kind of talk about before we wrap things up is kind of cool. These leaked photos appeared of a canceled prototype phone from Samsung called Project V, which was very much a folding phone like what we've seen with ZTE's Axon M. Mm-hmm. But, that was, designed to be launched in 2016 by Samsung. And of course, they were smart and never launched it because at the time, you remember, this is after the Note 7 fire stuff. They really had to reconsolidate their business and focus on making top-notch phone and regaining the trust of people, getting distracted, as it were, with, other things was not a good thing, right?
Yeah, well, and also because these leaked photos made it look like basically two Note 5s were super glued together.
Oh, God, it was really ugly in my opinion, actually. The design looks pretty bad. I mean, the Axon M is a bit clunky, but it has that kind of industrial, mechanical, machine, it's appealing to nerds kind of design. Whereas I think that Samsung Project V was just ugly all around.
I think it was. It was kind of a problem looking for a solution looking for a problem, I should say. And the Axon M kind of is too. I actually took the opportunity to pick up the Axon M while you were talking just now, and just to remind myself. Once again, locked to AT&T, so I can't use it anymore. Yeah,
I've got one from AT&T as well.
But I like the way that ZTE did it with the thinner screen on the one side. The implementation that Samsung seemed to be going for just looked like it was going to end up being a big, heavy brick of a phone that I'm just not sure ever would have done well with any type of consumer market.
Yeah, I mean, this looks pretty bad. When you see that they launched the Galaxy S6 around that same time, and you see how slick the Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge are, you're like, oh, wow.
Right. And I mean,
I'm so glad.
It certainly was a prototype. I mean, so it should be mentioned that it probably didn't incorporate the latest design language. So, any future iterations of that phone almost certainly would have incorporated the new design line. Because, I mean, there was a really big change in Samsung design between the Galaxy S5 and the Galaxy S6. And this is right in that wheelhouse. So, any type of product that would have moved forward from the prototype stage certainly would have picked up the design language that Samsung adopted for the Galaxy S6 going forward.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, interesting tidbit. I'll have a link in the show notes. You can have a look at it, and laugh or cry, depending on what mood you're in that day. Remember, if you're crying, ice cream makes things better.
It's always been my philosophy.
Yeah. So, hey, listen, Adam, thanks for being on. I want you to tell the world where they can find you, what you're working on these days. I know you're working on a new site that's part of the Android Authority umbrella, and a new podcast. So please tell the world where they can find you, your Twitter handle, all that good stuff.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll start off. I've been with Android Authority for coming up on a year now, actually. I'm on Twitter. I can be found at Dead Technology, which is also a WebOS throwback. But anyway, so recently I've been working on podcast production with Sound Guys, which is a sister site for Android Authority. The Sound Guys have put together a really great podcast, which shows you the world of sound like you've never heard it. So it's everything that has to do with sound. We have our first 3 tracks that are out in the iTunes store now. The first episode talks about how MP3s, the development of the MP3 essentially turned not one, but 2 industries on their heads. So you'll want to find out about that. The second episode talks about smart speakers like your Amazon Echoes and your Google Homes, and the legal implications of having those devices in your home. And spoiler alert, they're not good. And finally, the latest episode, which is out now, is the state of smartphone audio in 2018. We take a look at where we are from an audio streaming standpoint, basically the sound coming from your phone and how it is being interpreted by your headphones, whether it's coming through a headphone jack or whether it's coming through Bluetooth. So it's a really all-encompassing view of how smartphone audio is looking these days. And the best part about our podcast is every episode is 20 minutes or less, so it's not going to take up a lot of your time. We would love for you to check it out on iTunes or Google Play Music or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a review and subscribe, because there will be more to come.
And there you go, folks. I listened to it and I think it's great. It's a very kind of like NPR style, like a radio show. So you have like, sound effects, and it feels like you're immersed in a story. It's not at all conversational like this podcast. So if you're looking for something more like listening to an ebook, basically, that's kind of what this feels like to me, a little bit more like a traditional NPR show. Highly recommended. You know that I'm a huge audio fan. Sound Guys is a great site. Lots of resources and information on how to get a better audio experience with your modern device life. Yep. You guys know where to find me online. But before I tell you and remind you, I want to thank our sponsor, Audible.com. Audible is definitely the best, ebook platform, audiobook, I should say, platform on the market today. And if you want to listen to books because you can't read them, you want to be able to commute and drive your car while listening to your great reading, or you want to be flying for a while and enjoy some listening while you're in a plane for several hours, this is the platform to go to. Audible.com has a ton of choices and selection, probably the best on the market today. So check them out. The link to I'll put it in the show notes. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. And as I said, I'm Tankgirl, TNKGRL on Twitter. That's Tankgirl, the comic book character without the vowels. Same for my Instagram at TNKGRL. And you can also find me on YouTube under youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. That's my full name spelled out, Miriam with a Y. These videos on my YouTube are really just kind of a supplement to this podcast. So you show you the devices I'm playing with and stuff, so you have an idea what they look like and get some of my thoughts and kind of preliminary thoughts before I talk about things on a podcast. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos, tell your friends about it. But most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. You'll find the RSS feed there. We're also on Pocket Casts, on Overcast, and iTunes, on Stitcher, and very many places where you can subscribe to the podcast. If you can't find it by typing Mobile Tech Podcast, because those 3 words are used a lot, type my name, my handle, Tankgirl, TNKGRL, and you should be able to find it everywhere. So that's it. Thanks so much, Adam, for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming this time.
I am honored that you had me.
And stay tuned for another show next week, everybody. Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.